Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. I am flying without my editor this week, so might sound a little bit different, might look a little bit different, but something that we're trying to teach our clients here in 2024 is that you don't need to be perfect to get pregnant. You've heard me hear it, you've heard me say it on the podcast multiple times this year, and you don't need to be perfect to get the information out either. So we are spending, it's currently the last week of August. We always spend the last week of August up at my family's cottage, wind down, relax. I did not prep a podcast beforehand, so I came home today to get some work done. But Tyler, aka my husband, aka my podcast editor, did not come home with me. So we are going to do this on our own. And before we get into it, I just wanted to give a quick thank you to our podcast sponsor, Needed. They are putting some amazing products out there on the market that are backed by the research and the science that we want to see and look beautiful. One of my favorite products that they make is actually their powdered prenatal, because we're seeing a lot of really high quality prenatals in the market that have a very high pill count. And if you are someone who needs those extra nutrients because maybe your diet isn't, all that great, it's always awesome to have a powdered option to cut down on pill count. So ever since I found that powdered prenatal by Needed is something that I've been recommending to a lot of my clients who also adore it as much as I do. So you can check out their powdered prenatal as well as a slew of their other products over at thisisneeded.com and use the code Dr. Kelsey to get 20% off your first order. So thank you, Needed, for that wonderful coupon code. Today, we're talking male fertility. But specifically, I was reading this paper a few weeks ago. It came into my inbox. Every weekend, I have PubMed send me all of the new articles based on some of the keywords that I've prompted. And so one of those keywords is male infertility. And so I sit down every week on Monday, usually, and scroll through what they got for me. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so great. It's interesting, actually. August has been a very slow research month. I don't know, do researchers take August off, perhaps? I take August off private practice, so maybe it's just a slow month, just a slow month for everybody, which is totally fine. I highly recommend some vacation in August for sure. So it's been a little bit slower, but a couple weeks ago, I got this article. What was it called? Let me scroll back up. Oxidative stress associated male infertility, current diagnostic and therapeutic approaches. It came out June 2024. So very new. I'll actually link the PubMed ID in the show notes for you if you want to give it a read, but it does a really good job explaining oxidative stress. And we talk a lot about oxidative stress for women in terms of egg quality and how certain things can increase something called reactive oxygen species in the body. And our bodies, both male and female, are very smart. We know we're going to encounter things that are going to create reactive oxygen species. So we have internal mechanisms and systems built into the way that our body works to help clear that out. We have our own little antioxidant patrol going on. And then we get more antioxidants from our diet, and we get more antioxidants sometimes from supplements. And we talk a lot about that with egg quality, how reactive oxygen species can decrease the quality of eggs, and how our ovaries are very rich in mitochondria, which are really important in this process. But it's important for men as well. Because the reality is that the same thing happens when our reactive oxygen species, which are the bad, is too high, that our natural innate antioxidant capacity cannot handle it, cannot filter it out, in science, I'm pretty sure they call it quelch. No, something with a Q. I don't know. That part left my brain a long time ago, but there's a specifically sciencey word that's basically the antioxidants negate the reactive oxygen species. And that's what we want. We want this balance. We want some amount of reactive oxygen species in our body. It's within normal to kind of clear things out, but our antioxidant capacity should be able to keep this relative balance. We now live in a world that is very different than the world 50 years ago. And our diet looks very different. Our levels of stress probably look very different in some areas. There's obviously countries that that's likely not the case. Our environmental pollution looks very different. Our radiation exposure looks incredibly different. And we are seeing a decline in male fertility as our environment changes. It's very clear that there is a connection here. And when I was reading through this article, it's like I had like a little light bulb moment, because when you look at a semen analysis, like a good semen analysis, some of them not so great, a good semen analysis doesn't just look at concentration, motility, and morphology. We see things like pH, liquefaction, appearance, leukocytes, immature cells, viscosity. There's all these other components that the reality is, when we're looking at the semen analysis from a research-based lens, we don't have a lot of information on those things. Like, how much of an impact do they make? What matters? Do we need to focus on that? Like, the research really does focus on the big three, on concentration, motility, and morphology. So what I found really fascinating about this, because they have a cute little picture of sperm, and then it's like, these are the endogenous sources of reactive oxygen species, endogenous being internally made, and these are the exogenous sources, exogenous being not within the body. Exogenous sources being what we've already listed: environmental pollution, radiation, unhealthy diet and nutrition, and lifestyle factors. Lifestyle factors, things like obesity, tobacco use, alcohol use, sexually transmitted infections, presence of a varicocele, metabolic factors in terms of like elevated cholesterol and insulin resistance and diabetes and those types of things as well. We've talked about those on the podcast before. Endogenous sources was something I was very intrigued by, because the very first one listed was leukocytes, which are white blood cells. And I would say I probably look at 5 semen analyses every week, maybe sometimes more, maybe some weeks a little bit less. Let's say I'm looking at like 20 a month. Okay, that's like not a huge sample size, but it's fairly large. I would say 75% of the analyses I see include a look at leukocytes, and 25% don't. Some of them, unfortunately, just look at round cells, which is a combination usually of leukocytes and spermatatids, which are immature sperm cells. Some of them look at like other cells. I don't know. I don't know what they're including in that. So we don't always get a great breakdown, but I thought it was really fascinating that white blood cells were a marker of high reactive oxygen species. So I got reading, like, what do they mean by that? Why does that happen? And whenever I saw elevated white blood cells in a semen analysis, it became a fight, an advocacy moment for my clients, of me saying, there are high white blood cells in the semen. You aren't showing any symptoms, but there is some sort of immune response going on that we need to either figure out what it is and where it's coming from, or we need to just treat it. And we should probably treat you too, you being the female, because if there is some sort of high level of bacteria in the scrotum, in any aspect of the semen, you're likely passing it back and forth when you're having unprotected sex, right? So whenever we see high white blood cells, we've actually talked about high bacteria before. I'll put the podcast, I don't know the episode off the top of my head, so I'll pop it into the show notes for you. Clearly I'm talking about it a lot because it's something I'm like weirdly fascinated about right now, but it's also something that's coming up a lot with my clients. And when it comes up a lot, it's usually because there's something I need to learn. The universe is sending me a message, but the fascinating part is it's coming up a lot. But when I always ask my clients, so what did your doctor say about this report? And it's never coming up in conversation. Either they didn't mention it at all, or when the client said, well, what about this? They said, oh, that doesn't matter. But if there is an elevated level of bacteria, it might matter for the female counterpart of this partnership in terms of potentially having endometritis that might then be impacting fertility. But we also know that elevated white blood cells in the semen can actually impact the sperm's ability to swim. So it could potentially be impacting motility. And this was the first study that I found where they showed the World Health Organization cutoff for, it's called leukocytospermia, is actually potentially not low enough. So typically, the World Health Organization has the cutoff at 1 million white blood cells per milliliter, meaning we're okay with some being there, but if it's over 1 million, like, we've got problems. This study was actually showing that even 200,000, so 0.2 times 10 to the power of 6, could be detrimental. That's a significant difference in the cutoff. And it's not just necessarily about the back potential of an infection or like any sort of immune response. It's also because what they found is that the white blood cells make reactive oxygen species. So we're kind of getting dinged from a two-pronged approach here. It's not just the bacteria and potential impact on motility and viscosity of the semen, but we also might be actually increasing the cells that negatively impact your body's ability to make healthy sperm. And the tricky part when it comes to oxidative stress is you're not likely going to see that being reflected in a low count scenario. For example, you might have a really beautiful concentration. You might have 80 million sperm per milliliter and be well above that not only WHO cutoff of like 40 or 30, whatever low standards they have now, but our like optimal ideals is above 65. You can be well above that, but still have oxidative stress being an issue. Because how it impacts is the way that the sperm is made internally. The DNA integrity of the sperm is impacted. And unfortunately, with a standard semen analysis, we don't get that information. It might look like you have tons of sperm, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the sperm are of good quality. And I made a post earlier this week or last week or whenever it came out that basically said, like, we need to kill the narrative of preconception care being a female problem. Because the reality is that all of the things we talk about for women, like cutting back on alcohol, eating healthier, losing weight, taking better care of your stress management and your body and sleep and all of the like foundational pillars that you can read about if you Google, like, I want to get pregnant, what should I do? All of those things also have a positive impact in male health and matter just as much because sperm is 50% of the equation. I'm getting a little off topic here because I wanted to talk about the white blood cell thing, but I think that's a really important narrative to understand. And for all of you dudes out there potentially listening who have had a semen analysis done and maybe have been like patted on the back by your practitioner about everything looks good, you're not the problem. Two things I want you to consider. One, are your numbers truly optimal or are they just normal? Because our normal is the 5th percentile. It's sucky. The other thing I want you to remember is just because you have a lot of sperm that swim well doesn't actually mean they are conducive to a healthy, optimal pregnancy success. That your sperm might increase the risk of miscarriage if oxidative stress is high in your body. That your sperm might increase the risk of genetic defects if your oxidative stress is high in your body. All of these factors play a role. And if we're bringing in this concept of the immune system, now we have this whole other piece at play, right? Not only are the white blood cells potentially impacting the sperm from getting to where they need to go, which is like the most important part, but now we're actually seeing that they might be impacting the quality of the sperm overall. And not just the sperm that are there in that moment, but the sperm that are being made. So we really need to take this part of the semen analysis seriously. We also need to lower our standards from what the cutoff is and actually start treating and having these conversations if they're present at all, which is going to be a big change that we might not see for a while, but it's something to advocate for if this is on your report. And if you've had a semen analysis done, or your partner's had a semen analysis done and you whip it out and this is not something that they've looked at, let's look at it. Because again, if you're in your journey, let's actually talk to the people who are early on in your journey. If you're early on in your journey and you're being proactive as hell with your health and you're looking for answers, this is something worth fighting for and testing because the implications can be quite massive. And the amount of times I've seen this go unchecked is astounding. We had a client come in a couple months ago. They had a semen analysis done that was like 8 months old. And I was like, yep, send it over. We might want a new one, but like, we'll see what it looks like. And their white blood cells were quite high. And I asked them, I said, did your doctor say anything about this? And they said, no, they said not to worry about it. It doesn't mean anything. Okay, cool. I explained to them, like, here's what I want you to do. I want you to recheck it. Make sure that the recheck that you have has leukocytes involved so that we can compare. I also want you to do some endometrial testing to make sure that there isn't any sort of bacteria in the vaginal canal or the uterus that shouldn't be there. What we ended up finding was that she had very high levels of ureaplasma and mycoplasma. And he also did as well with some other bacteria because they cultured this time. They cultured the semen. And they both had to do 2 rounds of antibiotics. Then we did 8 weeks of high dose oral probiotics. She did 2 courses of vaginal probiotics. They got pregnant the very next cycle. And they had been trying for like 14, 15 months. That was quite literally what was blocking them. And they could have done that treatment 8 months prior. But it was not brought up. So I want to first and foremost, like, commend you for listening to the pod. Thanks for listening to me draw on about like whatever I feel like. Appreciate you for being here. But I also, I want you to understand how it's one thing to just listen to the information and it's another to advocate for yourself in this space. And I know that advocating for yourself can be incredibly challenging, but you're doing yourself such an amazing service by being curious and by searching out your own answers and being your own detective. So I want to just like give you a little virtual hug for being here. Thank you so much. If you're new to the podcast and you're just found us here, please give us a subscribe. A rating and review goes a really long way for me. It helps our podcast platforms know that this is good information. And when people are searching for fertility podcasts, will come up so that others like you that are looking for evidence-based solutions and answers will be able to find us. I want to just wrap today up by saying, like, there's so many moving pieces to male fertility that are so much more than just how many do you have. And we could talk about, I love these conversations because I think that we're hearing more, we're seeing more noise, and people are talking more about fertility, but the male aspect of that is still behind. Why? Men probably don't really want to talk about it. I get that, right? There's a lot of pride and ego wrapped up into, for both men and women, the ability to get pregnant. And that is a topic of conversation for another time, because your worth is not determined by your ability to bear children and how quickly you do that and what kind of support you need. But we see a lot of information out there for female fertility, but we don't actually see a whole lot of information out there for male fertility. And that needs to change because 60% of infertility has a male component, whether it's sole male fertility factor infertility on its own or a combination. 60%, more than half of couples who are dealing with infertility, there's a male component. And those statistics, unfortunately, aren't attributing subfertility, meaning men whose levels are like okay, but they're still not awesome. So that number's likely higher. And we need to go beyond, do you have a lot and do they swim well? And we need to look at the other numbers and we need to advocate in the arena of this matters. And we also need to take the concept of lifestyle medicine for men a lot more seriously. And if you need support with that, our male factor course, His Confidence, is a great place to get started. And Fertility Confidence Method will build you out that plan as a whole couple approach. And there's links in the show notes for you to check both of those out if and when you're ready. Okay? Thank you for joining me today. I will see you guys in the next episode.